And here we're looking at the hilum of the lung, so the opening where all those structures are able to enter the lung. We have the pulmonary artery in blue. It's got a thicker wall. It's a little bit bigger. We also have the pulmonary vein sitting underneath it. And again, they are colored red here as they're bringing oxygen-rich blood back to the heart. Here we see the diaphragm as it's relaxed in its dome shape. And then when it contracts, it's just going to flatten out and allow the lungs to be able to expand with air. We also have the pericardial sac that we need to knock out. Now, this is a sac that is physically surrounding the heart. There's a few layers to it. We have the outermost layer called the fibrous pericardium. This is the tough outer surface, got a little more rigidity to it than the rest of the layers. Just underneath that, we have something called the serous parietal pericardium. And so parietal, again, is not physically going to be touching the heart. Serous is just secreting a water-like fluid. And it'll be secreting fluid into something called the pericardial space, which is between this parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium. And it's just going to be filled with pericardial fluid that will be reducing friction as the heart is beating. And this visceral pericardium is going to be physically touching the heart, touching the myocardium or the musculature of the heart. And it's also going to be called the epicardium. Now, this is a cool picture showing you a more realistic view of the breakdown of these layers of this pericardial sac here. We have the fibrous pericardium, which is this outermost layer. It's going to be the tough layer. Just underneath it, we have our parietal serous pericardium. And in this picture, the pericardial space is filled with its fluid. So the parietal pericardium is going to be secreting part of this fluid. And then on the other side of the space, we have the visceral pericardium, also called the epicardium, and it'll also be contributing to some of this fluid here. Now, this is a diagram of these different layers, and it's just going to showcase a little bit better the actual differences in the layering itself. We have our fibrous on the outside. Just underneath it, we have the parietal serous pericardium. There's that pericardial space here. And then we have the visceral pericardium that's physically touching the heart here. And I drew some arrows just to remind you they are secreting fluid into that space there. Now, with the heart, we got a couple of structures we need to knock out before we start on the chambers. They're called auricles, and these are just ear-like appendages, and there'll be one on each atrium. And so here is one of them right here on the right atrium. And there is the left auricle that's sitting on the left atrium. Now, the heart has four major chambers. We have two atria and two ventricles, and they're just named after what side they're on. The atria are going to be sitting on top of the ventricles. So we have a right atrium, which will be in the upper right quadrant. This is where blood is going to be returning back to the heart. So after it has gone to wherever it needs to go, blood has to return to circulation and go pick up more oxygen, and that all happens where it enters into the right atrium. On the other side, we have the left atrium, and this is where blood coming from the lungs, after it's picked up oxygen, it'll be returning by the pulmonary veins, and they will enter the left atrium. We also have the right ventricle, and so blood coming from the atrium will travel down to the right ventricle. The right ventricle is going to be pumping blood to the lungs through something called the pulmonary trunk, which we'll see in a little bit. Now, in the right ventricle, we have a couple of internal structures we have to figure out. The first one's called conus arteriosus. Now, just as the right ventricle is starting to touch the pulmonary trunk, it'll actually narrow into a cone shape. And that little region where it's narrowed is called the conus arteriosus. We also have something called the moderator band that's found at the bottom of the right ventricle. This is just going to prevent the ventricle from filling up with too much blood and overinflating. Then on the other side, we have the left ventricle. And once blood has got to the left ventricle has got much more muscle compared to the right ventricle. And the left ventricle is going to pump it out to the aorta so it can go to the rest of the body.